Witajcie! Welcome. The Cleveland chapter of the Carpatho-Rusin Society and Friends of the Carpatho-Rusin Cultural Gardens of Cleveland would like to share with you our cultural gem nested within the Cleveland Cultural Gardens. To help you understand the importance of the gardens in general, I will share a brief history. We will then tour the Czech and Slovak gardens with our final stop in the Carpatho-Rusin Garden. There, you will learn about its history, how we share our culture, and finally, future plans. Since it would be difficult to tell you about all the gardens in the allotted time, I have attached a few list of sources that you can use to enhance today's presentation. Here's a bit of history about the cultural gardens. The Cleveland Cultural Gardens are located on approximately 254 acres of parkland dated to the city of Cleveland in 1897 by John D. Rockefeller. The gardens are located between Route I-90 and University Circle along Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard and East Boulevard. The earliest gardens are located along East Boulevard and later expanded to also include gardens on either side of MLK. Found within Rockefeller Park are two separate entities on the National Register of Historic Places. The oldest being the four stone bridges designed by architect Charles Schweinfurth that were constructed between 1897 and 1900. The other is the Cultural Gardens. So how did they come to be? Leo Wiedenthal was a journalist with a love of Shakespeare. As a tribute to the 300th anniversary of Shakespeare's death, he proposed and created a garden in Rockefeller Park in his honor. This would later become named the British Garden. Fortunately for us, his vision was wider, and he suggested that gardens be created to reflect the various ethnicities then residing in the city. He, along with Charles Wolfram and Jenny Zwick, established the Civic Progress League in 1925. This became the Cultural Garden League in 1926. In 1952, the organization's name was changed once again to the Cleveland Cultural Gardens Federation. It is currently the representative organization providing a direct link between the gardens, ethnic communities, and the city of Cleveland. Its motto is peace through mutual understanding. To help you with the progressions of the gardens, I've created this chart. In 1916, we begin with the British Garden, followed by the Hebrew Garden in 1926, and the German Garden in 1929. The 1930s saw 12 new gardens representing mostly Eastern and Central European immigrants, including the Slovak Garden in 1932, the Czech Garden in 1935, and the Rusin Garden in 1939. Between the 1950s and 1980s, 5 gardens were dedicated, and between 2005 and current day, 12 more gardens were added. To date, there are 33 gardens, and several new gardens are well on their way to becoming a reality. In 2020, Centennial Peace Plaza was dedicated. It was designed by architect Burik Shakaran along with Paul Burik and Tom Turkley of the Design and Construction Committee, who worked for 2 years to provide a gathering place for all nations. COVID prevented the dedication from being an in-person event, but fortunately, there is a YouTube presentation that was very well done. A string quartet plays Dvorak, while a montage of photos of various gardens are shown. There is a link on the handout page. Just as our cultures were in proximity in Europe, they are in the gardens. As you drive south from St. Clair Avenue, you come upon the Polish, Slovenian, Czech, Carpatho-Rusin, and Slovak gardens. Considering that these gardens were all dedicated in the 1930s, it is hard to imagine how the funding was raised. This was the time of the Great Depression, a time when work and income were short in supply. There had to be a very strong belief and pride in the importance of the cultures to inspire these immigrants to support their gardens. As you will see in the photos of our gardens, some assistance was provided by the Works Progress Administration, called the WPA for short, to create the stonework seen throughout the older gardens. That's the history of the gardens in a nutshell. First, we will go to the Slovak Garden, which was dedicated in 1932. It sits upon 3 acres of open land between East and MLK Boulevards. It is the focal point, and it has a stone terrace, which is its focal point. The statue of General Milan Stefanik impressively sits at its center. The statue, originally created in 1924, was previously located at MLK and Jephthah Drive, where it was viewed daily by many commuters traveling this area. When the garden was designed, a foundation was installed to accept the large statue, but the Slovak community preferred it to remain at its original location. In 2013, roadwork required the statue to be moved, and that is when it took up its residence in the Slovak garden. Along with General Stefanik, there is a bust of Father Jan Kolar, a Lutheran priest and politician, who's also a writer and scientist, and defended the rights of both the Lutheran and Catholic Slavics against the encroachment of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His poetry predicted Slovakia's independence. On the opposite side of the terrace is a bust of Catholic priest Father Stefan Furtick, a prolific author who wrote important readers that were widely used in Slovakian schools. He was the founder of the first Catholic Slovak Union, Uneta, in 1890, and the first Slovak Ladies' Union in 1892. These fraternal organizations were extremely important in the lives of the immigrant community. A large green space was left on purpose to allow for large gatherings that include poetry, reading, singing, and dancing. From the Slovak garden, we travel to the Czech garden, which was designed by landscape architects B. Ashburton Tripp and Maurice Cornell. The many hedges create a circular layout that is dotted with busts of important Czech figures. It was dedicated in 1935. The entrance to the garden is flanked by two monuments dedicated to Czech parents. It is done in English on one side and Czech on the other. The stone wall at the rear of the garden contains a frieze depicting the arrival of Czechs to Bohemia and then to the U.S. Busts of composer Berdik Smetana and author Božena Němcová are atop this wall. Božena is one of the few females represented in the garden, and she was recently replaced through the efforts of Paul Berg. Around the central area are busts of historian and statesman Franciszek Polatsky and composer Anton Dvorak, who's a priest and novelist Reverend Jendrik Bar, and publicist Karl Havlicek. Featured in the center is philosopher, teacher, and theologian Jan Amos Kamensky, as well as statesman and first president of Czechoslovakia, Tomáš G. Masaryk. The two statues are illuminated by solar power, and it is the only garden to boast this feature. The solar panel was made possible through a grant from the Czech Foreign Ministries. In 1939, as a symbol of the flourishing Czech community in the New World, former Czech President Edvard Benes and his wife planted 2 linden trees in the garden, which continue to flourish today. All but one of the sculptures are the work of Frank Jito, who was born in Cleveland of Czech descent. He lived a long life and is responsible for many busts throughout the garden, including the Carpatha Rusin garden. More recently, the keystone that adorned Probulov Hall came to reside in the garden. It represents a time gone by where Czechs could gather and socialize. It was here during World War I that young men volunteered to fight for the area that would then become Czechoslovakia. So now we come to the Rusin garden. Our Rusin garden was dedicated in June 25th, 1939. The festivities were attended by religious, state, and local dignitaries. More than 1,000 Rusins from Northeast Ohio and the surrounding areas also came to the event. Initially, the garden was cared for by the Rusin Elite Society, which was founded by Father Josef Hanalya and Eugene Mankovich to encourage the children of Rusin immigrants to socialize, gain education, and become acclimated to the American way of life while maintaining their Rusin heritage. Surrounded by a forest of mature trees, our garden is reminiscent of the homeland of our ancestors in the Carpathian Mountains, with the lower level besides a free-flowing Duin Brook, which leads to a sloping hillside on the upper level. This is some of the lovely stonework in our garden done by the WPA. We have an upper and lower terrace. On May 25th, 1952, a pedestal and bust of Father Alexander Dugnovich was dedicated in the lower garden. The cost of this bust was $1,300. Father Dugnovich, a Greek Catholic priest known as the Awakener of the Rusins, was imprisoned for his beliefs and actions against Magyarization of the Rusin people. When offered his freedom, he said, "Ja Rusin bul, yesim budu," which means I was, am, and will be a Rusin. The poem with this title is the anthem for Rusins everywhere. Unfortunately, in the 1970s, the gardens went through a rough time and the bust disappeared. Only the pedestal remained. In the 1990s, the gardens saw a recovery. John Kerniski and my grandmother, Florence Orris, made sure that the gardens were properly maintained. It became John's passion to see the bust of Alexander Dugnovich return to its place of honor in our garden. This became a reality with the help of Paul Burrick and Holmes Park Trust, as well as several other generous benefactors. The new bust was installed on a taller pedestal in the upper garden in November of 2011. The cost of this bust was $20,000. A dedication ceremony was held in June of that year, 2012, June 24th, which included the unveiling of the bust of Father Dugnovich and a weekend of activities with guests and dignitaries from many states. This brings us to the current times. In August 28th, 2022, our garden was renamed the Carpatha Rusin Garden to give visitors a better sense of the origin of our ancestors in their Carpathian mountains. It was also done to help visitors understand that we did not misspell Russian. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was held in conjunction with One World Day and included guests John Rigetti, president of the Carpatha Rusin Society, as well as Maria and Kathy Silvestri of the John and Helen Tima Foundation. The sign change was made possible with grants from the Holmes Parks Trust and the John and Helen Tima Foundation. It is our hope to add a sign in the lower garden as well to let visitors know that the area is also within our garden. Our garden has allowed to share our heritage with many. One example of this is dining with the Dugnovich event, which included a bring your own picnic lunch followed by song and dance instructions done by Tom Katranich. We also participate in One World Day, which is an annual event sponsored by the Cultural Garden Federation. This is a gathering of thousands of Cleveland residents and visitors from all over the world who come to learn about the cultures represented in the gardens. One World Day begins with the Parade of Flags. It is very colorful to watch as each garden marches along the parade route with many participants in ethnic dress. The parade is followed by a naturalization ceremony. At our garden, we help visitors find their ancestral village on the Rusin Village map. And here you can see Living Traditions Folk Ensemble perform, and they never fail to impress and entertain. Kathy and Tom Katranich always include education about the Rusin culture as part of their performance. We participate in the Passport to Peace program, where adults and children learn about the garden's cultural heritage and get a stamp in their booklet. As part of this program, we have an interactive educational area. For several years, it was a board that held Rusin words. Each participant drew a slip of paper with a question and then found the answer to that question on the large answer board. In 2019, we developed an Andy Warhol interactive area for children and adults to learn about Andy Warhol, who was a famous Carpatha Rusin artist. They then created their own piece of art. In 2018, our Carpatha Rusin Society was invited to join the Czechs and Slovaks of Cleveland to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the formation of Czechoslovakia. We had an information table and Living Traditions performed. It was a weekend of activity that culminated with the placing of a wreath at the Czech, Rusin, and Slovak gardens while the national anthem of each was sung. What is happening in our garden today? Thanks to Diane Essek, our project manager, we have many plans for improvements to our garden. We are beginning with 4 informational pedestals in the upper garden to tell our story, who we are, our language, our homeland, and famous Rusins. Currently, the ground has been prepared, the bases have been installed, and shrubs have been planted. The stonemason will inscribe the pedestals in preparation for delivery to their new home in our garden soon. Funding has been acquired with a grant from the state of Ohio through the Ohio Department of Natural Resources and the Holden Parks Trust with assistance from the John and Helen Timo Foundation. To receive the funds, we had to create a nonprofit organization with Ohio roots. The Friends of the Carpatho-Rusin Cultural Garden of Cleveland, Friends for short, was born. The next item on our wish list includes correcting water issues on the stairs, the removal of invasive species on the slope connecting the upper and lower garden, and an addition for handrails on the stairs. The projects will all come to fruition when funding is available. Beyond these 3 projects, we hope to have a design competition to incorporate permanent artworks that are in the spirit of Andy Warhol and his vivid, colorful flower style. Perhaps this artwork can then be installed on the slope connecting the upper and lower gardens. We hope to have ongoing programs to bring people to the Carpatho-Rusin Gardens to celebrate its beauty through active artistic experiences. We would like to collaborate with the Children's Museum to encourage the arts in young people as well. Finally, we invite anyone with a desire to see our garden grow and flourish to become a member of our Friends organization or donate toward our future projects. For more information, go to friendscarpathorusingarden.org. Don't forget the attached handout, which has links to YouTube videos, websites, and books about the cultural gardens that you might find interesting.